It was a chilly, overcast Friday morning in a sleepy Arizona suburb when Ethan Cole, a man whose very name had once commanded silence in briefing rooms and fear in enemy camps, stepped out of the desert wind and into a nondescript gas station on the edge of town. The air carried the scent of dust and fuel, and the streets were quiet for a man who had spent most of his life in places where quiet meant danger. Ethan, now 41, wore rugged jeans speckled with old dirt, a faded gray hoodie stretched thin at the elbows, and a battered military issue backpack slung low on his shoulder. The canvas torn at the edges from years of use in unforgiving terrain. He had a slight limp, the kind that doesn't cry for attention but whispers of pain endured and battles survived. His beard was uneven, a mix of chestnut and gray, and his eyes piercing yet tired held a heaviness no man his age should carry. As he stepped inside, the automatic doors hissed open, and a faint chime broke the silence. A single-board cashier looked up from his phone behind the counter, eyes narrowing at the figure who had just entered. Ethan ignored the stare. He didn't walk with confidence anymore. He walked with purpose, the kind only a man who's lived 100 lives can possess. As he moved to the back of the store, he felt every eye on him, though there was only one pair. He reached into the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, then walked toward the register without a word, his footsteps muted on the tile floor. The cashier, a skinny kid barely out of high school, was suddenly alert. The man in front of him looked like trouble. Worn clothes, blank stare, a military backpack that could be hiding God knows what. When Ethan reached into his coat not for a weapon, but for his wallet, the kid panicked. His thumb slid beneath the counter, pressing the silent alarm that alerted the local police department. Ethan didn't notice. He placed a crumpled $5 bill on the counter and waited, still and calm, as if he had all the time in the world. He didn't speak unless he had to. Talking had never been his weapon of choice. Outside, the desert air split with the sudden scream of sirens. 2 police cruisers pulled up with urgency that far outweighed the situation. Tires screeched, doors flew open, and officers drew weapons before they even crossed the threshold. "Hands where we can see them now," they shouted, storming into the gas station like they were breaching a cartel compound. Ethan turned slowly, instinctively calculating the angles. The distance between him and the exit, the firing range, the safety status of each officer's weapon. Old reflexes kicked in not to fight, but to assess. "I'm not armed," he said, his voice deep and calm, trained to maintain composure under far worse pressure. But his words meant nothing. The younger cop, adrenaline surging, lunged forward, slamming Ethan against the wall with force that sent the water bottle clattering to the ground. The older officer followed, pulling Ethan's arms behind him with unnecessary aggression, slapping cold steel cuffs onto his wrists. "You got anything sharp on you? Anything illegal?" The officer barked. "No," Ethan replied. "Check the bag." They ripped open his backpack, spilling its contents onto the grimy floor. A military challenge coin engraved with a sealed trident, a worn sniper logbook with coordinates and handwritten notes, a folded American flag wrapped in plastic, and a laminated ID card that read Ethan Cole, Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, Ret. The older officer's gaze hesitated, scanning the items, but his skepticism didn't fade. "Military, huh? You ex-military types always think you're above the law," he muttered. "You look like a threat to me." Ethan didn't flinch. He'd faced worse in Helmand Province. He'd been hunted in the mountains of Kandahar, betrayed in villages where friend and foe wore the same face, and dropped into enemy territory with nothing but a rifle and a radio. This was nothing, but it stung deeper than any bullet wound. The store's security camera showed no theft, no aggression, no sign of criminal activity, just a man buying a drink. Still, they dragged Ethan out, cuffed and silent, past gawking passersby who snapped photos and muttered judgments. At the precinct, they fingerprinted him, booked him, and placed him in a holding cell, never once listening to his story. He didn't resist. He'd learned long ago that resistance only fueled ignorance. He sat on the bench, hands in cuffs, eyes closed, leaning back against the cold cement wall like he was back on a rocky Afghan hillside, watching for movement in the distance. Hours passed, no charges, no explanation, just waiting. Somewhere between the stale coffee and fluorescent lights, one of the officers finally ran his ID through the federal database. The silence that followed was deafening. "Wait, Ethan Cole," the younger officer whispered to his partner, Navy SEAL, the sniper from Operation Eye Inspector. His partner blinked, color draining from his face. "You mean the one who pulled out the CIA team from Pakistan in '09, the one they gave the Distinguished Service Cross to in secret. But by then, the damage was already done. Ethan didn't need their recognition, he needed his dignity, and it had been stripped the moment they'd slammed him against that wall. As they scrambled to clean up the mess they'd made, trying to soften their posture, Ethan remained silent. He didn't want their excuses, he wanted answers, justice, truth. In his pocket, the emergency sat phone the DoD had given him for post-mission emergencies buzzed once. A message from someone he hadn't heard from in years. Sit tight, they screwed up, help is coming. And help did come, but not from a lawyer or a public defender. The next phone call came from the Pentagon itself. 3,000 miles away, a general had been briefed, a general who knew exactly who Ethan was, a man who had once said in a closed-door meeting, "If Ethan Cole ever falls, it better not be on our watch." That general was now on his way because the country Ethan bled for had just handcuffed its own ghost. 3 states away, inside the heavily guarded corridors of the Pentagon, General Marcus Langford stood in front of a massive wall-mounted digital screen filled with live briefings, satellite imagery, and real-time threat assessments. The force general was a man whose name carried weight in every war room from Langley to Kabul, living legend of strategic brilliance and battlefield integrity. He was reviewing final reports from a Black Ops mission that had concluded just 72 hours earlier, an international crisis that never made the news because men like Ethan Cole ensured it didn't. That mission, codenamed Operation Pale Sky, was one the world would never hear about, a clandestine recovery of highly volatile data intercepted by rogue intelligence agents operating from the borders of a failed state. The stakes had been unthinkably high. A flash drive containing drone schematics and nuclear positioning codes had fallen into the wrong hands, and Ethan, long retired, deliberately off-grid, living far from the recognition he deserved, had been pulled out of civilian obscurity for one last ghost walk. He'd completed it flawlessly, vanishing into the night after ensuring the transfer was intercepted, the agents neutralized, and a Third World War narrowly averted. The mission's success was so crucial that only a handful of people knew his name was ever associated with it, and Marcus Langford was one of them. So when a blinking red notification from an internal DoD secure channel appeared on the general's screen, flagged critical personnel incident, he paused. He clicked. The report opened. At first it didn't make sense why it was Ethan Cole's name showing up in a police incident log from a small-town precinct in Arizona. As Langford scrolled through the incident summary, watched the grainy footage of Ethan being thrown against a wall and handcuffed like a common criminal, a slow-burning fury began to rise in his chest. His fingers clenched. The idea that this country could treat a man like Ethan, a man who'd operated in deep silence, to protect it as nothing more than a suspicious drifter, was more than an insult. It was a failure of national integrity. Langford didn't delegate. He didn't write memos or issue protocols. He turned to his aide, Colonel DeSoto, and said only 5 words. "Get the jet ready now." 3 hours later, a black SUV with unmarked government plates pulled into the parking lot of the dusty Arizona police precinct, its engine humming like a growl beneath the hood. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was growing awkward. Officers had already realized they'd made a mistake. They were reviewing Ethan's federal file, reading the redacted lines, noticing the repeated tags, classified, level 5 clearance required, eyes only. The younger officer, the one who had pushed Ethan into the wall, stood at the edge of the hallway, arms crossed tightly, lips drawn in worry. He had seen the medal citations now, had read the summary of Ethan's mission history, and a pit had formed in his stomach. At that moment, the front doors opened. The reception officer looked up and froze. In walked General Marcus Langford, in full military uniform, the rows of ribbons across his chest sharp as blades, his polished boots thudding with finality against the linoleum. He didn't stop to ask directions. He didn't slow to acknowledge the salutes hastily thrown in his direction. He moved through the station with a purposeful, almost predatory calm. Officers turned as he passed, and even those who didn't know his name knew his rank, and that someone in their house had seriously, deeply messed up. The chief of police, a portly man named Harlan Briggs, stepped forward with a nervous smile. "General Langford, sir, we weren't expecting. Where is he?" Langford cut him off, voice like tempered steel. "Holding cell. Room C, sir. If I may explain." "You may not," Langford replied, walking past without even glancing. In holding cell C, Ethan sat just as he had for the last several hours, quietly, unmoving, hands still cuffed to the table, expression unreadable. He looked up as the door opened. Langford entered and closed the door behind him. For a moment there was silence, and then, in a motion so deliberate it stunned the entire room watching from the hallway, General Marcus Langford raised his right hand and gave Ethan Cole a formal, slow, respectful salute. "Chief Petty Officer Cole," he said with conviction, "on behalf of the United States government and every citizen you have silently permit, offer you my personal and professional apology for the disgraceful treatment you've received today." Ethan blinked, the first crack in his stone face appearing. "Sir," he said, nodding, his voice low. Langford moved to the table, pulled the keys from the officer standing frozen in the doorway, and personally unlocked the cuffs. The metal clattered onto the table, loud in the dead air. "This is not how we treat our heroes," the general said. "Not on my watch." Outside the room, officers stood in stunned silence, watching through the reinforced glass window. One sergeant whispered he called him a hero, but the general wasn't done. He stepped into the hallway, turned to the gathering of law enforcement personnel, and delivered a blistering but calm reprimand that would become legend in law enforcement briefings for years. "Do you understand who this man is?" he said, voice echoing down the corridor. "Do you realize the gravity of the mistake you've made? The man you cuffed and humiliated in front of civilians was once the tip of the spear, a ghost whose very existence has saved more lives than you will ever count. He operated in shadows so you could sleep peacefully under streetlights. And today, because of prejudice, negligence, and fear, you treated him like a criminal." No one responded. "No one dared," Langford continued. "You will file an official report of apology, you will purge this record, and you will attend a training session on recognizing military identifiers and treating veterans with the dignity they've earned." The chief nodded mutely, sweat beading on his forehead. Ethan emerged from the room, massaging his wrists, but holding his head high. "Come on," Langford said, motioning toward the exit. "Let's go get you a real damn meal." But Ethan didn't leave immediately. He turned to the officers, many of whom still avoided eye contact, and simply said, "I didn't need an apology, I needed respect." Then he walked out, not with a strut, not with pride, but with the unshakable calm of a man who had survived the worst of the world and still stood taller than it. As the SUV pulled away, the precinct remained in stunned silence. Inside the vehicle, Langford looked over at Ethan. "I wanted to give them hell," he said. "You already did, sir," Ethan replied. "That's the most terrifying thing." They shared a brief laugh, one filled with shared history, mutual understanding, and the kind of bond only formed in the crucible of service and sacrifice. For the next few miles, neither man spoke. They didn't need to, but both knew something had changed. This wasn't just about Ethan, this was about every veteran forgotten, misjudged, or dismissed by the very country they swore to defend. This moment, this small crack in the system, would spark something much bigger than either of them imagined. The days that followed Ethan Cole's release were quiet only on the surface, like the stillness before a sandstorm in the Afghan desert, when everything seems calm and silent until the first wind screams through. The precinct tried to sweep the incident under the rug, as many institutions do when their mistakes drip with humiliation. An internal memo was circulated, labeled "Resolved Misunderstanding, no public comment," and officers were advised to avoid speaking about the Arizona sniper incident. But the silence didn't last. One of the civilians who had seen Ethan being arrested at the gas station had posted a blurry photo on social media, an older man, rugged and cuffed, face stoic, surrounded by officers with guns drawn. The caption simply read, "This guy was just buying water. Why'd they treat him like a terrorist?" At first, it received only a few comments, most speculative or dismissive, but 2 days later, the story exploded. Someone, anonymous perhaps, a former operator, perhaps someone inside the military network, leaked a redacted file that identified the man in the photo as Chief Petty Officer Ethan Cole, former Navy SEAL, credited with over 200 confirmed long-range engagements, survivor of 18 black classified missions, and decorated with citations rarely spoken aloud. The post went viral in less than 24 hours. The ghost they handcuffed. The sniper who saved a president's convoy. From battlefield to jail cell, this is how we repay our heroes. Headlines screamed across news outlets. Veteran communities rallied like firebrands, flooding Twitter and congressional inboxes with one message: never again. Interviews were requested, news vans parked outside Ethan's cabin in the desert. He turned them all away. He wasn't seeking attention, he hated it. In fact, all he had ever asked from this country was that it not forget its own. But the storm had already come, and his silence only made the noise louder. Talk shows debated the implications. Legislators called for hearings. For the first time in decades, the issue of veteran misidentification and systemic disrespect was on the national stage, not as a political talking point, but as a story with a face, a name, and a scarred soul behind it. Meanwhile, General Langford wasn't idle either. He took the event personally, not as a public embarrassment, but as a personal mission. Behind closed doors, he called a meeting with the Secretary of Defense, to Joint Chiefs, and representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs. "We're done playing damage control," Langford said, his voice measured but unflinching. What happened to Ethan Cole was not just a mistake, it was a symptom of a deeper rot. He proposed a new federal directive, Operation Valor Recognition, a mandatory law enforcement training initiative focused on recognizing military service credentials, PTSD identifiers, and appropriate engagement protocols for veterans. It would include direct collaboration with former operators, real mission case studies, and above all, accountability measures. The Secretary of Defense agreed reluctantly at first, then with conviction, "Let's do it. And let's put Ethan's name on the first page." But getting Ethan to cooperate wasn't so simple. He hadn't answered Langford's calls in days. He didn't want to become a symbol. He wasn't interested in politics or media redemption. He'd seen men die for flags and countries, and now he just wanted to live quietly with what he had left: his integrity, his solitude, and the ghosts he still carried at night. It took an unannounced visit from Langford, again alone, again without cameras, to get Ethan to open the door to his cabin. The general stood there, dust on his boots, medals gleaming in the harsh sun, but face humble. "I'm not here to drag you into anything," he said. "But they're listening now, Ethan, and they won't be for long." Ethan let him in. They sat over bitter black coffee and even bitterer memories. Langford talked about young recruits who didn't know who fought in Fallujah, about urban cops trained more on threat posture than human perception, about how the war never really ends, only changes shape. Ethan stayed silent for most of it, watching the sun crawl across the horizon. Then finally he said quietly, "If I do this, it's not about me, it's about the kids I left behind, the ones who didn't come back." "That's exactly why. It has to be you," Langford said. And so, it began. A reluctant warrior became an even more reluctant leader. Ethan agreed to one interview, just one, with a respected combat journalist who had embedded with SEAL teams during Operation Neptune. Hammer. The interview was raw, uncomfortable, and deeply human. Ethan didn't boast. He didn't cry. He spoke the way he fought, precise, with meaning behind every word. "I didn't expect a parade," he said. "I just didn't expect to be treated like a threat in the country I bled for." The interview aired during prime time. It broke ratings records, but more than that, it broke hearts. America, for a rare moment, looked into the mirror and saw the cracks in its reflection. Veterans across the country came forward with similar stories. Some were dismissed as crazy, some detained because of PTSD episodes, some beaten or mocked by officers who didn't understand the difference between trauma and threat. Congress moved fast. Operation Valor Recognition passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Ethan refused to attend the ceremony in D.C., but Langford made sure his seat remained empty, front row, with his name etched in brass. Police departments across the country restructured their veteran engagement policies. Former service members were recruited to lead local workshops. Civilian patrol officers now carried digital scanners that could verify military ID tags in seconds. And most important of all, a culture began to shift, not overnight, but undeniably. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to his quiet life, rebuilding the broken pieces of his world with slow, deliberate intention. He fixed up his cabin, helped the local high school coach their rifle team, and mentored a young boy who had lost his father in Iraq, never telling the boy what he had done, only showing him how to shoot, how to breathe through chaos, and how to carry the weight without letting it crush your soul. The precinct where it all happened saw change too. The young officer who cuffed Ethan publicly apologized on video. He later quit the force, not in disgrace, but in humility, then joined the VA as a counselor for transitioning veterans. Ethan never spoke to him again. He didn't need to. The apology wasn't for him, it was for the next man in uniform who walked through that door. Years passed. Time softened the sharp edges of the incident, but its lessons remained carved in stone. Ethan Cole never wrote a book. He never ran for office or gave speeches. But across every precinct, every police academy, and every military training base in the nation, there was one grainy still image printed in every manual: a photo of a weathered man in handcuffs, eyes steady, dignity unbroken. Below it, A quote attributed to Ethan, though he never confirmed it. "You don't need to know my name, just know how not to treat the next one like me." And somewhere deep in the Pentagon, in a locked cabinet inside General Langford's office, sat a sealed envelope containing Ethan Cole's full service record, along with a handwritten note, in the General's own hand: "If this man ever walks into your jurisdictions, stand down, salute, and listen. He's already done more than enough.